M52, the 3 R's and composting. So basically this talks about reduce, reuse, and recycle. And so the first question I have here is, why does reduce come first in the slogan? So why would they put reduce, reuse, and then recycle? So there's a reason for that. Read about that. And then if we look over here, if we look at source reduction, so source reduction is reducing from the source, like it sounds. But why is that the best option in reducing waste? So this has to do with manufacturing. So why, if we reduce from the source, that carries on to the consumer, and so the consumer doesn't need to throw away lots of things. So think about when you open up a package, and sometimes the package is wrapped in a package and then it's wrapped again in a package, or it's got clear wrap around it. So that's pretty unnecessary. And so that's what we're talking about with source reduction, is removing that from the source. So how about we fix the packaging, like the example in the book it gives about a CD. And so if you reduce the packaging in the first place, then that's less that less put on the consumer as far as recycling or reduce, they can't really reduce what they have if it's packaged that way. But it reduces the amount of waste in the first place. And so consumers don't need to worry or try to figure out what to do with that excess garbage. So that's what source reduction would be. And then the second bullet up here, the second sticky note, has a lot to do with that. So how does reducing packaging help in waste prevention? So companies are always looking at waste prevention and reducing the amount of materials that they use, because that reduces their cost. So if they reduce the amount of packaging, well, that's going to reduce the amount of cost that they have, and then in turn also reduce the amount of pollution. And then down here at the bottom, how can reusing a product increase residence time? So what exactly, first of all, is residence time? And then how can reusing the product reduce that time? So residence time is basically how long is the product in use before it needs to be tossed or can no longer be used. So how can we increase that residence time? How can we reuse things, and how does that increase that time? And then moving on to page 582, take a look at this figure. So it's closed loop recycling and open loop recycling. So how exactly are these different? Well, you can see with the closed loop, it's basically a circle, so a cycle, versus the open loop. There's multiple different directions that this product can go. So the top, this would be maybe an example of aluminum cans. They give the example of carpet, but you could give the example of cans. So we use a can, we recycle the aluminum can, and it's made back into a can. And in this example, they're using carpet. It's recycled into carpet fibers and made back again into carpet. But an open loop would be that maybe they use plastic, like these PET bottles, and then the consumer drinks it, recycles it, and then the material, the plastics, are shredded, and they can in turn maybe later be used for clothing, like a polyester blend or something like that. And so that would be open loop. So the product didn't end up being another plastic bottle. It ended up being something entirely different, but yet it was recycled. And so that's what we're referring to as far as closed loop and open loop. And then you might be able to think of maybe some more examples of how that would work. And then down here, moving on to recycling. So how does recycling metal differ from other products? Metal is much different as far as recycling. We can use it over and over and over again, and we can use it for the same thing. Whereas if we're recycling paper or plastic, especially plastic, it tends to reduce the amount of uses. So we can't just use it over and over and over again without having to add material, add things to it, or having it just be inert, so it won't be able to be used. So that's kind of how they're different, but make sure you read that section. And then up here, it says how much of the total MSW is recycled on average. So out of all the garbage, how much do we recycle? So this could be on average yearly out of that whole municipal waste. And then the book is so new that it talks about China not taking our recycles, which actually just happened a few months ago. So it's kind of amazing that the book is already talking about that. But New York stopped recycling for a while. So why did they stop recycling? What would be a reason to do that temporarily? They're recycling now. And then is there always a market for all recyclables? So is there always people that want to buy paper, plastic, glass? So that could be potentially a reason why New York stopped recycling for a while. And then moving over to page 584, this kind of refers back to figure 51.5, so you'll have to refer back to M51. But what percent of MSW could be composted? So out of all the composting, so we've reduced, reused, recycled, so now we've got all of this material. It could be food waste, it could be paper, that could be composted. So what percent could be? And that figure 51.5 will tell you. And then over here, it just talks in here about composting. And so what is the ratio between carbon and nitrogen? So there's a certain ratio that you should have while composting so that you get a good compost. So it doesn't attract insects. It composts quickly. It doesn't get too hot or too dry. So there's a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So what would that be that would make for good composting? And why is composting beneficial? So why should we do this besides reducing waste? But what is composting beneficial for in everyday life? And that concludes M52.